Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Salamun Alaikum, and welcome to Suhoor Bites, where we take a few moments each morning to reflect on the wisdom of the Qur'an. In these blessed moments before dawn, as we nourish our bodies for the day of fasting ahead, let us also feed our souls with the light of divine guidance. Each day we will reflect on a verse from the Qur'an, drawing inspiration and lessons to carry with us throughout the day. The verse I'm going to look at today is the 52nd verse of chapter 51, Adh-Dhariyat. Here Allah says, كَذَلِكَ مَا أَتَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ مِنْ رَسُولٍ إِلَّا قَالُوا سَاحِرٌ أَوْ مَجْنُونٌ. So it was that there was not sent a prophet to the people before them except that they called him a magician or a crazy man. Here in this verse, Allah is explaining a pattern repeated throughout history. Whenever a prophet came to a people to guide them and to bring them truth, he was dismissed and ridiculed with insults like magician or a madman or a crazy man. And this wasn't just a rejection and a ridicule of their message, it was an attempt to undermine the credibility of the messenger, to silence truth by mocking the one who was bringing it. It's one thing to critique or ridicule the message, but it's another thing to attack the person saying it. The prophets went through what we would call today character assassination. They were ridiculed and mocked as people who could not be trusted, people who were strange and people who were crazy. Yet what we know is that the prophets, despite facing this opposition, they remained steadfast. And this isn't because they were immune to pain or they had very thick skin, but because their hearts were full of trust and faith in Allah. They knew their duty was not to convince every soul, but simply to convey the message with clarity and courage. And this verse teaches us a lesson that truth isn't always accepted immediately. Even if you bring all the most convincing reasons and you explain it in a very nice and logical manner, that doesn't mean people are going to simply accept what you're saying. Part and parcel of bringing the truth and speaking the truth is that you're going to face significant opposition. And in a world that often mocks faith and religion, this verse speaks directly to every single one of us, every believer who has ever felt alone in standing for what is right. Being ridiculed for standing for the truth is not a sign of failure. It's a sign that you are walking a path that many people fear to tread, and it's a sign that you are walking the path that the prophets themselves had walked on. One thing that we see from the lives of all the prophets is that they continued to work and call people to Allah no matter how many people rejected them. Secondly, this verse reminds us of a powerful principle in life, and that is that the final outcome is not always in our hands. It belongs to Allah. The prophets did their part. They gave everything they could to spread the religion. They spoke the truth, they lived it, they embodied it. But the results were never guaranteed in their lifetime. Sometimes they saw people's hearts change, and that was a moment of profound happiness for the prophets. And sometimes they saw people reject them and mock them and ridicule them. Yet their trust in Allah never shook. In our own lives, sometimes we often become discouraged when we don't see the fruits of our efforts, whether in our families, in our communities, or even in our own personal lives. But this verse invites us to think about things slightly differently. That the outcome is in the hands of Allah. Just how the prophets were ridiculed despite their best of efforts, similarly we plant the seed, yet it is Allah who causes it to grow. The believer works with full strength, but walks with full trust also, knowing that Allah's plan is unfolding even when things look uncertain. And lastly, one thing to reflect on is why did they reject the prophets? Why is it that whenever a people would receive or be sent a prophet, the first reaction that they would give would be to reject and dismiss and to insult the prophet? Why did they call them names, ridicule them, and turn away from their message? Part of the answer lies in the deep discomfort that truth brings to those who are attached to power, privileged, or specific ways of thinking. Many people could not accept the message of the prophets, not because it wasn't clear or it lacked evidence, but because it disrupted the worldview they were invested in. It disrupted their way of life. And to accept the message would have meant questioning their social status, it would have meant challenging cultural norms, or it would have meant, at the least, swallowing that ego. And for many people, that was too heavy a price to pay. People rejected the prophets because they were too attached to their own way of living, their own culture. And the prophets came with a truth that challenged this. It challenged many facets of society. It challenged many ways in which they would think about the world, and it challenged many practices that they would do. And when people don't understand something, or when it threatens their position, they often choose to mock it instead of reflecting on it. It's easier to laugh at something than to admit you might be wrong. And many simply couldn't accept that a message so simple and pure could come from someone they viewed as ordinary or beneath them. So instead of listening with open hearts to the prophets that came to them, they dismissed them with insults and ridicule. Not because the truth wasn't there, but because they weren't simply ready to face it. And this is something that we actually pray to Allah to protect us from. In Dua al-Iftitah, towards the end where we're making a number of supplications, one of the du'as that we make is Allahumma ma arraftana min al-haqqi fahammilna. O Allah, whatever you have made us recognize of the truth, enable us to carry it. Because it is easy to simply recognize the truth, but it's very hard to act according to it.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم